Hi everyone. While we wait for a few more people to join in for today's meeting, I thought I'd just get started, but I would just like to say thank you for coming along today and thank you for the people that are about to join as well. But as we get started, I would just like to begin with an acknowledgement of country. I'd like to start off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land that we're all on today and the continuous connection to land and sea. I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I'd also like to just put a disclaimer here before we get started, acknowledging that I work for Ocean Protect, which is a company that supplies, installs, and maintains WSUD assets. So there is that conflict of interest with that, but there is also a range of other people on this call as well that will have their own conflicts of interest. And the real important thing here is just to kind of manage those conflicts of interest. If you think I'm doing something wrong, pull me up on it, and I'll try help manage others if I see anything happening. In terms of the agenda for today, just while we wait for a few more people to join, just going through some basic meeting logistics before we get started. Then I'll do about a 5-minute update on the framework just to kind of let people be updated on the numbers of how many people have accessed it and that sort of stuff. Then I'll look to do about a half-an-hour discussion on the feedback that has been provided to date for the framework and the network. Following that, opening up for Q&A if people want to have any questions or thoughts about that feedback. And then looking to wrap up about that hour mark, and then happy to stay on if people want to stay on and chat about anything else. In terms of logistics, if you can just keep yourself on mute when you're not speaking, just helps avoid any weird background noises. If you want to say something, if you can raise your hand virtually, that way I can call upon you to speak. When you do speak, at least for that first time, please make sure you say where you work, just to kind of help manage that conflicts of interest. And if people can just be respectful of everyone's opinions, ideas, and time, we're going to be thinking outside the box, talking about trying to solve decade-long issues. So it's important to kind of require some weird and maybe different thinking, but also in terms of time, just sticking to the agenda so that people can get out on time. But also, this is not the time to be promoting products and services and other things here. It's about discussing and working together on an issue that the industry is facing. Now, today, I would just like to say thank you to all of the people and organizations that have been participating in these network meetings. We've had councils, state government, consultants, non-profits, water corporations, water associations, and a whole range of others as well. So thank you to all of them and welcome to all of the new people and new organizations. For those new people, just to provide a bit of clarity, the National WSUD Compliance Network is a group meeting regularly to discuss WSUD compliance with a focus on kind of holding the development of the WSUD maintenance compliance framework accountable and making it transparent, while also providing an opportunity for the industry to provide feedback on that framework. And the framework is a free package of information, resources, and tools for councils to use to improve their implementation and management of WSUD assets within their jurisdiction. For anyone that wants to have a chat after today or wants access to the framework or wants to learn more about this framework, you can email me or call me. You can go to wsudcompliance.com.au. The slides and recordings will be made available there. The framework is now on LinkedIn as well if you want to keep up to date there. Otherwise, you can also access the framework through the website with that giant QR code. I've also put the link in the chat for people to use. In terms of providing an update on the framework, so what's happened to date since the last meeting at the start of August, 68 councils in Australia have accessed the framework, so there's been a lot of interest looking at it and a whole range of other organisations in the industry that has looked at it as well. There was a 4-month consultation period that happened between April and August, which saw over 500 people getting involved. So again, a lot of interest in kind of seeing and getting involved and understanding this project. Over 250 people have shown interest so far in this National WSUD Compliance Network. That's across 6 meetings. Today is the 7th meeting. So again, a lot of people. And we've also received in-principle support from 7 organisations in the industry, with those organisations being Stormwater New South Wales, Stormwater Queensland, Cooks River Alliance, which is a catchment group in Sydney, Frank Sydney, which is part of Stormwater New South Wales, and Stormwater 2030, which is another thing Stormwater New South Wales has started recently. Also, Outland Stormwater and Optimal Stormwater have provided in-principle support as well. In terms of the feedback, so that's what we'll kind of get into now. Once I get through this, I'll open up for Q&A if people have any questions or thoughts or things they want to raise. So the framework went through a 4-month consultation period this year, starting in April, finishing in August, and there was a range of different things that happened during that time. I had meetings with a range of stakeholders. I had emails, phone calls, with these stakeholders as well. I presented on this at 2 conferences, 2 webinars. There were 3 network meetings and there were 2 in-person workshops. So there's been a lot of opportunity and a lot of people involved during this time for people to get involved. As part of that consultation period, there were 2 in-person workshops. I co-hosted one with Stormwater New South Wales and then one with Stormwater Queensland. And across those 2 workshops, there were 32 individuals involved. And these are the organisations that came along. We had councils, water corporations, catchment groups, state government, stormwater associations, and others that came along to understand the framework and provide some feedback and input as part of that consultation period. As part of that workshop, there was a survey to provide people the opportunity to kind of share some concerns and thoughts around the framework and relevant stuff, with one of those questions first being what would be the barriers for councils in implementing a WSUD maintenance compliance program for private assets. And so this was kind of the breakdown of the responses from those 32 people. If you look at this, you'll see that it's mainly resourcing is that biggest issue. Budget, time commitment, staffing issues take up over half of the responses. And then there were other things such as competing priorities, stakeholder opposition, and a few other bits and pieces. But basically what I've taken away from this is to really focus on councils that have limited resourcing, limited budget, limited staffing to actually do this work. So I'll be looking to see if there's anything I can do with the framework to help even make it easier and less, I guess, resource dependent. The other question was there any concerns about the framework? And both of these questions have been asked in the poll and people are responding to it now. But I wanted to see if people actually had any concerns around the framework. Again, the primary one being resourcing at 34%, project integration came in at 18%, stakeholder resistance at 15%, and complexity and density of info and materials at 13%. So again, resourcing seems to be a big kind of concern, and a few bits about kind of implementing it internally within their organization seems to be another concern around the framework. So again, going to see what I can do in the second version of the framework to really address these concerns that people have. Now just to go through some of the kind of key takeaways that I've taken from the consultation period based off the comments and feedback and annotated notes that people have sent through to me. One of the things that people highlighted to me, and it was an idea I'd been thinking about, was how this framework, what it's trying to provide, is doing it in a way that's trying to do a balancing act for this, because it's trying to provide enough so that it can address those kind of resourcing capacity issues that councils would have, but it's not trying to provide too much so that it becomes kind of prescriptive and excludes certain organizations, because there needs to be sort of flexibility so that councils can use it as a starting point and make it suit them. However, if I was like, you have to use this system, you have to use all of this, you have to follow these exact steps, it's going to lead to a lot of councils just being like, no, I'm not going to touch this. So there is a bit of a balancing act. I'd love to provide everything, but that's not possible with the sort of project that this is. Another concern, or I guess feedback, was around Ocean Protect's involvement in this. For those of you that don't know, Ocean Protect has been leading and establishing this project. We're the ones that have provided all the funding for it. And look, most people have been fairly happy with Ocean Protect's involvement in getting this started. There's been a few people that are unsure about it and some people don't like it. That's the reality with most projects. There's always going to be people that like things, don't like things. However, in my opinion, if Ocean Protect wasn't doing this, I really don't think this project would be as far as it is right now. Tried doing stuff like this at Blacktown City Council, but councils are restricted and a lot more bureaucracy in terms of what they can do and how fast they can do things, while Ocean Protect has that capacity resourcing that can really help speed the establishment of this up. Next thing was people's appreciation for the flexibility of the framework. A lot of people liked how they could take it their own different way, doing it in their own kind of duration, doing it their own different way, and having a different end goal per council and flexibility was a really important part of developing this framework. And the purpose of that is each council is going to be unique. Each council is going to want to do things differently. So the framework is trying to provide a lot, but again, not being like, this is how you have to do it. This is a way you can do it, but councils then can play around with it and make it work for them. Next one, there was a comment about it just being another document to be ignored. With the amount of interest that has been shown this year, I really don't think that it is something that's going to be ignored. It has really started a conversation in the industry, which has been great to see. But also with the amount of time and capacity that Ocean Protect and I have put into this, we're going to continue to push this because we see this as something that will help the industry and that the industry needs. So we're going to continue to push this because we see the benefits of it. Another piece of feedback was that people want to see more case studies. So I'm going to be looking to work with Blacktown City Council to develop a case study based off their over 10 years experience running a WSUD compliance program. But then as councils start to use the framework as well, I'm going to try to start developing case studies off that so that other people can look towards what's actually being developed and used and what's happening for the experience. Another feedback was around the idea that people need more help with understanding how to implement. And I agree with this. I think the framework should look to try to provide more info about this. And with the second version of this framework, I'm going to look to maybe provide a chapter or maybe a small kind of additional document that can really help provide some questions and some things that should be done when you're looking to implement a program based off this framework. The next thing was talking about erosion sediment control and linking this sort of framework and this program with erosion sediment control, but I also think there's the opportunity to link it with a whole range of other environmental and water related compliance programs. And so I think that is something councils can look towards, and that is something I can maybe mention a little bit more within the framework. However, I think that was a really good pickup by some people in the industry. Going off the data that I showed before about how resourcing seems to be a big issue and internal support, I want to look to try and help people understand how they could implement with limited resources and support. Long term, I would love to develop some sort of tool or resource that councils can answer some questions, and it tells them exactly how they could do and how they could implement a program and operate it depending on their level of resourcing, capacity, and support. However, for now, if there are people wanting to know how they could implement with limited resources and support, I'm more than happy to have those conversations offline or on a phone or whatever, and help you figure out how you could use the framework depending on your capacity and resources. Another thing was to look at expanding the legal review. In the consultation draft of the framework, it looked at New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. Since that release, we have also now got lawyers to look at South Australia and Tasmania. And since then, I've also expanded that review into Western Australia, Northern Territory, and ACT, doing my own kind of review based off what the other 5 states had from the lawyers' opinions. And going off in terms of providing more info, I would like to look at trying to help people understand what environmental harm is, how you measure environmental harm, those sorts of terms, because within the legislation, there's all these terminologies and different things, but I want to try provide more clarity and maybe look to provide this within the appendix, maybe as a separate chapter, or maybe even an additional document that could help councils figure this out. Another thing that was highlighted was that people would love to see an automatic online system. They think that would help a lot. And so the idea of that mock-up information management system that comes with the framework is to kind of help you work towards implementing an automatic online system. At the moment, I'm not really going to go pushing or promoting a certain system to use because I think each council has already spent so much time and money establishing their own systems. So the idea is use that mock-up system, play around with it, figure out what you need, and then try to update your internal systems. But there are probably opportunities and systems out there in the market already that could maybe do some of this work. For example, I know Blacktown City Council are looking at kind of developing an automatic system for their program. Another thing people said was how people just need to start the journey with small steps. Two words that I really took away from the Queensland workshop in July was small steps. The framework provides a lot of information. There's a lot contained within it. However, you don't actually have to go using all of it at the start. You can just use small bits, pieces here and there. For example, you could just use the development conditions and get them in place, or you could use some fact sheets, or you could do other bits and pieces. You don't have to go doing the whole framework at the start. Just take small steps to work towards implementing the program rather than making it a rush. Another thing that was good to see was that people were wanting to know what they can do to help the industry, besides from the councils who can actually implement this and enforce compliance. People in other organizations and private companies, consultancies, manufacturers and stuff are really wanting to know what they can do to help. So that's been really good to see. I could probably spend ages telling each individual how they could help the industry. So I'm not going to do that today, but if you're interested in understanding how you can help and support the framework or improve maintenance compliance, that's something I'm more than happy to talk to outside of this meeting. Another thing that people saw as kind of a big barrier and concern is conflicts of interest. Now there's the conflicts of interest around, I guess, me establishing this project. There's the conflicts of interest around internally at councils in terms of implementing the framework. So managers, directors, CEOs, general managers, they might not be happy to implement such a program that would be enforcing compliance. And then there could be developers who really don't want to be doing more things, putting maintenance contracts in place and having to spend a bit more money. And then also there could be the conflicts of interest around the private asset owners that could be pushing back and be like, oh, I don't want to do this. I don't want to maintain my assets. However, I really do think this is something that can be overcome. I think we can kind of overcome this. Again, it depends on what conflicts of interest you're concerned about. But if it's internal, look towards trying to help people understand the benefits, the economic benefits, the social benefits, the environmental benefits for the community and the environment for the LGA. If it's developers, try work with them to understand why they need to be doing it, and similar with asset owners. Some people saw it as complicated. I'll be honest, I agree that the framework can be complicated at times. There is a lot of information and it can be probably a bit overwhelming. However, I have done the best I could to cut it down to simplify it as much as possible. And I'll look at it again to maybe try and simplify it as possible. However, there is only so much I can simplify it because it is trying to tell you how to set up a compliance program, which does need strong legal foundations and processes so that if you go down that route of taking someone to court, issuing fines, you have those proper systems and processes in place so that you can support yourself with those endeavors. Another thing was there was a webinar I did in May with a lawyer where we talked about kind of the law for WSUD asset maintenance, whether it's illegal or not to maintain them. And a lot of people were not familiar with the regulatory requirements at the start of that webinar. I did a survey and 70% of people said they weren't familiar with the legal obligations regarding maintenance of WSUD assets. So this framework really looks to help kind of solve that issue by making it clear what those requirements are. And with the expansion of the legal review in the second version, it would help the other states that weren't covered in that first version. Another comment that I've seen during the consultation period, but also just through my career, is that councils shouldn't enforce maintenance on private properties if they're not maintaining public properties. And so it becomes this or thing, should they do private or public? For me, I think it's an and question. I think we should be doing private and public. I think if councils are concerned that they need to be managing all of their public assets, by getting private assets to work and operate compliantly, that reduces the amount of polluted stormwater and pollution entering public systems, which can help reduce the cost and all that sort of issues that happen in public systems. It also makes sure that the polluter is actually being held responsible. If they reduce the amount of pollution they're generating on their private property, then it means that they won't have that much to remove, which makes it cheaper and easier to maintain. Another concern was about the integration into organizations. So 18% of the workshop participants were concerned around this integration. And again, this is probably going to be unique per council, and so happy to talk to people outside of this meeting about it. But this framework is really flexible. It's really a starting point and it would integrate with your organization. It's just really understanding how that is. So that is probably a conversation I'm happy to have with people outside of it. But with me looking to expand into that implementation information, as part of the second version, that should also probably help remove some of the concerns about integration. People want to see the framework piloted. I am in conversations with a few councils at the moment that could potentially look to pilot the framework, whether that's wholly piloting it or partly piloting some of the framework. So hopefully in the next year or two, I can have a bit more case studies and information about the actual use of this framework. And then the final piece of feedback around the framework was that there are some corrections that are needed. So some people went through the whole guideline and documents and wrote comments and notes throughout it, and it provided detailed emails with feedback. And so I'm going to go through those materials and update based off those grammatical and kind of ideas and perspectives in that, so that gets updated. So from here, kind of what I'm looking to do next based off all of that feedback and the other feedback, that little bits and pieces I didn't cover today, is to look to do those case studies so that councils have something to look towards, to understand and maybe relate to other councils. Look to provide more information about how to implement the framework and implement a compliance program. Maybe look to provide more linkage to erosion sediment control and other environmental and water compliance programs. Look to provide more information about that legal review for the other states and territories and provide more clarity around some of the terminology, such as what is environmental harm. Look to probably include on the website a conflict of interest policy, again, for the transparency, making it super clear how that conflict of interest has been managed for this project. Probably look to simplify the process maps to make it easy to read and not as confusing, as that was a concern some people raised. Put more of a focus just on private assets. At the start, I was trying to make this about private and public. However, I think for now, making it clear that this is just for private, however, public can benefit a little bit from some of these materials and information. So I'll do that. Within the guideline, there is currently content for 3 fact sheets, and I might look towards actually creating those fact sheets so people can kind of see this is what you could design it as, with certain photos and all of that. Next, looking at outlining the cost of doing nothing. So many people are saying, oh, we don't have the resourcing, we don't have the capacity to do this. But something I'd be interested in understanding is, if you don't do this, what are those costs? What are those impacts of not doing this sort of work? Looking to create a build your own program tool or something like that, some sort of resource, so that councils can play around with the idea of how much resourcing they need to commit to achieve the goals that they want. That's probably not something that will be done very soon, but that's probably more of a long-term sort of part of this project that I can look to do. The website also needs a bit of updating, and then I'll be looking to do the piloting of the framework, hopefully in the next year or two. Yeah, so that is kind of my to-do list for now. And if I can start a poll, I just wanted to provide people the opportunity. Let me pull this up. Just a sec. So I'm just going to launch a poll. I'm just curious, before we get into Q&A, providing people that opportunity to just respond to a quick poll being like, do you think that this to-do list makes sense? Do you have any issues with it? And so that should hopefully be up right now for people to respond to if that's appeared. And I would just, be interested to see if you think I'm missing anything, or maybe you're happy with this. So I'll just give a few moments to let people do that. While I wait for people to continue to respond to that, I might just move on to talking about the network feedback, but feel free to continue with that poll if you haven't done it yet. But some of just comments and questions and answers that people gave around the network feedback, and then we'll get into the Q&A for people to talk about all of this feedback being provided, was that people are really enjoying this network as it provides them an opportunity to learn more and keep up to the framework. that was the whole point in starting this network. However, from next year, I really hope that we can start talking about other WSUD compliance issues as well. People are keen to hear more about case studies and examples. Again, hoping in the next year or two to have those case studies for other councils, but look to try get that Blacktown case study done soon so people can see that experience that Blacktown Council has had. People are interested in learning about the different asset types and performance of WSUD assets. There are a lot of resources and opportunities and events that do happen in the industry already that focus on that. So for me, I didn't really think focusing too much on this. However, if this is something that people are really interested in, this is maybe something we could look to do, or maybe I could get a state association to do something like that. So it's kind of separated from the framework. Another thing was to see involvement from state government. So within those workshops I did, and I think today we've got some state government as well here, but seeing their involvement in these discussions in this project and getting their support. And so it was really good to hear in the Queensland workshop and the New South Wales workshop, the work that state government is starting to try do in this space to try and provide some support for councils in terms of doing WSUD or doing compliance with stormwater assets. And another thing that a common comment was about people want to learn how to do better design and maintenance. That's an important thing to be talking about and learning about. However, again, there's a lot of resources and opportunities within the industry already for that. So I think I'm going to try and not focus on that too much. But again, if that is something people really want to talk about, I can try and see if that can be within this meeting or someone else can do an event for that. And so following that, I'll just, opening this up for Q&A. If anyone has any questions about anything I've just said, do you agree with it? Do you not agree with it? I've got the responses coming through for that poll I've just done, but I'm just curious to see if there's anyone that wants to raise or say anything. Feel free to raise your hand if there is. If there isn't, I'm happy to move on. Cool. Okay, I'll move on, but happy to come back to this if people think of anything as we kind of look to wrap this up. So just talking about what's coming up next, looking to kind of what's happening in the next 6 or so months. I'll be looking to try and update the framework or as much of it as I can by kind of the February, April, which is when the next network meeting would be, or the one after that, so that there would be kind of a second version that people could look at, and you can register for that February meeting with this giant QR code, where in that meeting I'll look to provide comments about going through that revised work, saying what I've done, what's happened, what hasn't happened. And then maybe if someone's open to talking about anything else, we can have other presenters. Happy for this not to just be me presenting on WSUD compliance and other things. And then for 2025, my focus really is to look towards a maintenance guideline and accreditation, looking to really improve that quality of maintenance happening, looking to pilot the framework. I wrote frame rather than framework, but looking to pilot the framework and creating some case studies so that people can, again, see that it works and understand what does work and what doesn't work. And then again, probably throughout the year, just continue to do a meeting every 2 months to provide people that opportunity to discuss and learn about this framework and other WSUD compliance things happening in the industry. And so that is the end of everything I have to say today. A bit earlier than I expected, but I just want to say thank you all for coming along. If people want to stay on and have questions or comments or a discussion about anything, happy to stick around and have that conversation. If you need to go and want to talk to me after today, my email's there, my phone number's there, the website is there. You can connect with us on LinkedIn or access the framework and have a look. So yeah, just thanks everyone for coming along, getting involved. I'm happy to stay on and have a chat if anyone does. Otherwise, see you at the next meeting, hopefully.
Hi, Dan.
Hi, Justine.
Hello, everyone. Do you have the results of the poll that we did in this meeting? Yeah, we'll bring that up to have a
Yes.
look.
Yeah, I can have a look at that. So I'll end the poll we just did. And so you're talking about the first one.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah. So let me know if you can see this.
Just curious to know how close it is to what you've seen in the past.
Oh, wait, let me go back. So,
Oh, sorry, everyone. My name's Justine. I'm from CSIRO.
thanks,
I broke the
Justine.
rules.
That's all good. Um, so are you able to see the results, or is that only on my screen?
I'm looking at barriers for councils. I think that
Okay,
was
yeah,
your
so that's not
slide
coming up.
initially.
But yeah.
Yeah,
So if
thank
we
you.
look at that, so I can see the results for today, 78 people said budget required, 8 people, so 8 out of 11 said budget required, 4 out of 11 said time commitment,
Okay.
8 out of 11 said staffing issues, 6 out of 11 said staffing priorities, and the others all had very small things. So fairly similar for barriers.
Yeah, great. Okay.
And
Thank
then the
you. So
other
it's
one,
pretty safe to
again,
say it's universal.
yeah, so the other one, 5 out of 11 for resourcing, 4 out of 11 said no concerns, then the others are all fairly small. So yeah, again, resourcing seems to be the main thing for people, which makes sense.
Yep. So you spoke earlier about putting together some information in the framework around how to approach this from a resource poor
Yep.
perspective. Can you speak a bit more to that about how, what kind of ideas you
Yeah.
have there? Thanks.
Yeah. So for that, yeah, well, firstly, I think what I'd like to do is develop the kind of a tool or resource that councils can use where they answer a bunch of questions, and then it can kind of help them figure out, okay, this is what you could do. If you only have certain amount of time, certain amount of money, maybe you just focus on rainwater tanks or OSDs or GPTs, and then with time you could maybe add more assets. So like with Blacktown Council, they include a whole range of WSUD assets within that. However, maybe it could just be a OSD compliance program at the start, and with time you add more to it. So I think kind of phasing it that way, prioritizing depending on your goals and targets for a council. So maybe with Blacktown Council, what we did, we focused on industrial properties as we deemed those to be the most high risk. So we started the trial with them. They're in the moment of updating that and expanding off those properties. So you could focus on that. Other councils might be like, oh, let's just help residential properties because we want to help the kind of less informed people, I'm not sure what you want to call them, but people who aren't super familiar with, I guess, property management to understand how they can manage their little residential strata property or something. So I think, yeah, just looking at how big that scope is and what you target to try include, but also the time frame. If you only have so much money, don't try and implement the whole framework at once. Maybe just start off putting the development conditions in place and start to capture some data on where assets are. In a few years, councils then could look maybe, okay, let's start sending out some engagement letters to let people know that we're going to start auditing. A year or two after that, start auditing. And then from that, you can start to trial out all the different processes. So I think it's, yeah, the speed of implementation, the scope of it, and the prioritization of what you want to look at targeting.
That would be great in a web-based application. So people can do a survey and then from there it spits something out.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
well,
you did mention before that. Oh, yeah, just do that in your spare time, please.
yeah, no, I'll see how fast I can do that. But from now, the priority is kind of by February to April, look to update the guideline process maps information management system. Following that, maybe try add those additional resources and tools such as build your own program tool or whatever it wants to be called.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. You did say that there were tools out there and lots of councils have their own, but what kind of tools are out there for someone that doesn't have any, council-based program? Are there any really inexpensive ones that they could use?
So I guess when I was talking about that, so I'm going to use Blacktown Council because that's the council I've worked for, but they've got different things to manage, I guess, data and information within their organization. So they use Tech One to manage kind of properties, but then for their public assets, they're using Ascetic. And so with that, that could be slightly tweaked and updated, and that's what the Blacktown compliance program are trying to do at the moment to make it relevant and automatic for private assets. So there's that kind of opportunity. So each council should have some sort of technological system in place. I would assume a lot of people probably use Tech One and maybe some other things out there. And maybe I need to workshop this and survey people more to understand what already exists within councils. And then maybe I can provide a little bit more guidance from that because, yeah, I'm not super familiar with that. That's something I'll need to look into a bit more.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're right. It's a whole nother aspect to this. We need to clone you so there are 10 of you.
Tell that to Brad, who's still on here.
Yeah, come on, Brad. Thank you. This has been really interesting. Thanks.
Thanks, Justine. Does anyone else have anything they want to ask or question, or happy to head off? Leo, I see you.
Hi, Daniel. Leo Crusty from Enviro Australis.
Nice to meet you. Thanks for coming.
Likewise. I did try and talk to you before you went off to Ocean Protect when you're Blacktown Council on the subject.
Yeah.
I think you might have been slightly distracted at the time. My question is, and I'm not a very good employee and I couldn't work for council. And Justine, that's me. What surprises me is that we have an environmental policy. EPA Act 1994 says that it is an offence for an individual organisation to pollute stormwater.
Yep.
And therefore, why is there any... I respect the need for bringing this to everyone's attention, fine. And I'm wishing to participate from an industry point of view, leaving our respective organisation hats behind. I'm an engineer and I've been at it for a little while, 50 odd years in fact. What surprises me greatly is that there is a lack from EPA to publicise the very simple fact that there is legislation in place that causes the responsibility to sheet home to the owner of an asset, regardless of whether it's private or public, to maintain it. So, and because I've only tuned in this, more lately in this WSUD maintenance program, where in this program have you included, or can we include, a responsibility based on current legislation? So that people understand, you drive down the highway and the sign says 100 kilometres an hour, you are supposed to know that that is the speed limit, regardless of whether you agree with it or not. Yeah. So why can't people just observe the law and also apply their own social consciousness to comply with that? Yeah, and make that part of the core of, okay, here's a program that shows you how to do it, but the reason for doing it is straight out compliance.
Go and chase the crow.
Yeah, so I guess, I agree. EPA does need to be getting involved with this, and there has been a little interaction with EPA and looking at this and coming along to some of the meetings and stuff. So there is that interest from EPA. However, I do think there needs to be that conversation. At the moment, I guess my focus is developing this framework so that councils have a tool, and then bringing in EPA to kind of help get that regulation happening, because at the moment, WSUD assets are really a kind of a forgotten infrastructure. It's really just put in place and forgotten, so it's not really enforced. So councils aren't enforcing it. So private assets aren't getting maintained. The community isn't pushing for public assets to be maintained because most of them are hidden, or people don't understand that they actually have a function compared to roads or speed, like driving down the road, as you said. Those things are easier to see and easier to understand. So I think people haven't really been pushing that. And so I think while other people can be pushing that, I'm looking at developing this framework to help councils. And within this framework, there is that legal information saying this is what the law says. It is illegal. These are the potential consequences. But it is something that EPA probably does need to get involved with a bit more. And that is a conversation I'm going to be looking at, try and push more.
I would be in support of the associations that we belong to,
Yep.
being the advocate body to do that, which means that it takes it away from the conflict issue of yourself, myself, and others.
Yeah.
And that surprises me with our respective associations that in some respects I feel they're frightened to actually say it when the mechanism is there, and the EPA should see this as a great source of revenue, because after all, police
You're breaking up, I think, a bit. Yeah, well, I think Justine is part of Stormwater New South Wales and Brad's part of Stormwater Queensland, and I do feel like there are some conversations being had, especially with Stormwater New South Wales in this space. However, like I know I've had many conversations with Andrew Thomas, who's the president of Stormwater New South Wales, and he's keen to try and get EPA to do more, and he is trying to change the status quo a bit. So I think it is something to probably keep an eye on and see it happening. I know Brad's had conversations with EPA before, and I'm not sure if he wants to come on and say anything to that, but there are people that have had this. Brad?
Oh, so I was just going to let you finish, Daniel.
No, go for it.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks, Leo, for the comments. EPA, gee, where do I begin? I've certainly let them know multiple times that this is an issue and that it is illegal to not maintain stormwater treatment assets. I've been doing that for about three years. I originally did a Bush lawyers review of the legislation, and thankfully Daniel's coordinated a lawyer to do a more detailed and more expensive assessment to fundamentally confirm that it is illegal to not maintain assets. Like, yeah, everyone knows you're supposed to comply with the speed limit. I actually don't think everyone knew it was actually illegal to not maintain stormwater treatment assets, like at least definitively, until this review that Daniel's led. So that's clear now. There's obviously going to be a transition between recognising something's illegal and actually enforcing that legislation. But certainly New South Wales EPA have been, as one example of an EPA authority, have been made well aware of this. I've personally told them and communicated and emailed them a bunch of stuff, including the legislation review that's in the framework. So they definitely know about it. It is a potential source of revenue for these guys. So I'd certainly encourage them to do something about it. In terms of the associations, they're definitely being liaised with. So the workshop that Daniel referred to was with Stormwater New South Wales. That was a collaborative event on the framework. So certainly Stormwater New South Wales knows about it. Stormwater Queensland also attended the event that was in Brisbane, led by Daniel. But fundamentally, these are a volunteer association, so they've got limited capacity in their own. The more people that we can get lobbying the state government and the EPA about this issue, the better. It certainly doesn't have to be limited to Daniel or stormwater state associations. Does that help at all? I don't know. I'm just rambling, as usual.
I think Leo's frozen.
Oh.
Sorry, Leo, if you're speaking, I don't think we can hear you. Your internet speed might have dropped out a little bit. If you turn your camera off, sometimes the video can compete with the internet space. So that's it. So I'm not sure if you had anything to add, Leo, at least from your audio.
No, that's fine. Thank you very much, Brad.
Cool. Thank you. No worries.
Yep. If no one else has anything, I'm happy to call the meeting here. Cool. Okay, well, thanks everyone for coming along and getting involved and doing those polls and sharing your thoughts, and looking forward to catching up at the next meeting in February. See you, everyone.
Okay. See you then.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Dan.
Bye.